Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to an ACTI event. In this occasion, the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination has instigated an interdisciplinary panel, which we have named Welcome to Sodom. It is a dialogue among colleagues from different departments, schools, and colleges here at LMU. And the purpose of it is bringing us together to talk about environmental justice and the power of filmmaking. With us, we have a group of philosophers, scientists, and artists who join us in this idea that interdisciplinarity is one of the fundamental pillars in the future of higher education. Nicole Bouvier-Brown is an associate professor of chemistry and biochemistry from the Seaver College of Science and Engineering. And she holds a PhD in environmental science, policy, and management, and has written about air pollution and air quality data. Brian Treanor, professor of philosophy, and also the Charles S. Casasa Chair of Hermeneutic Philosophy. His interdisciplinary teaching and scholarship explore a wide variety of areas with an emphasis on environmental philosophy, ethics, and philosophy of religion. Charles Swanson, professor of cinematography in the School of Film and Television, has served as chair of production and worked in a multiplicity of awarded short and feature films, including All the Best, Billy Sears, Contradictions of the Heart, Rain, and I'd Rather Be Dancing. ACTI really would like to thank them all for their participation and willingness to explore an extraordinarily complex reality in the context of a really powerful, revealing, and devastating documentary film, which you have access through the page of ACTI, produced and directed by Corian Weigensammer and Christian Currens. And this is open to our LMU community, and the instructions to obtain the link to this film and the password are described in this same webpage for this event at www.missionlmu.edu/ACTI. So Welcome to Sodom is a documentary which portrays the life of over 6,000 women, children, and men who live in desperate poverty in the world's foremost dumping site of unwanted electronics. 250,000 tons of discarded computers, smartphones, air conditioners from the electrified and privileged digital world finds its way, mostly illegally, into Akbo Glo Shie in Ghana, or also known by its inhabitants as Sodom. So the way in which we have set up the agenda, we will begin with statements by each of our panelists, and then we will proceed into an open dialogue among them, and I will serve as a moderator. And so with any further ado, Dr. Bouvier-Brown, please, the table is yours.
Thank you. So I wanted to speak a little bit about my experience as a chemist watching this video. So when I watched the video, I think what stands out to me is the exposure to chemicals, both human exposure, animal exposure, and the environmental exposure. And it makes me think about the lasting effects of that exposure. And so I wanted to share some visuals to help with this discussion, if that's okay. Give me a second. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I think of exposure, what we were basically introduced to was electronics, right? And so the examples that were used in the film were things like computers and wires, but when you can boil down electronics to heavy metals that are covered in plastic. And so I was able to do a little bit of research into the site and found multiple studies that looked at chemical exposure from these materials. One thing is the polybrominated diphenyl ethers, or PBDEs. They're used as flame retardants, and they're found in all electronics. They were found in the soil in one of these studies. They resist degradation in the environment. And the study suggests that it travels through the air to local gardens and markets because they found these material in the food that the people would be eating. The exposure is thought to affect child development, and I'll speak more about their effects in a little bit. But it seems like most of the exposure is with particles. So particles in the air could be dust, could be soil, could be soot. But the chemicals then adhere and absorb onto these particles or chemically combine with these particles in the air. And exposure can be either breathing it in, inhalation, could be dermal contact, right, touching the materials, or it can be ingestion, like eating the food. And as we saw in the video, this is exacerbated by fire. So burning the material creates even more particulate matter, these particles. It easily accelerates the off-gassing of the chemicals because of the temperature. And it provides a lot of energy that can create new chemicals for exposure. Most of these studies that I found focused on heavy metals. So they found things like aluminum, copper, lead, and zinc in the air. And these were above OSHA standards, given what the researchers had to compare it to. They found a variety of metals in blood, in particular lead and cadmium, that were above either the US or European standards, depending on who the researchers were doing the study. And they found a variety of metals in urine, particularly chromium and arsenic. And so the highlighted ones here are metals that are found at high levels. Some are neurotoxins and some cause multiple organ damage. The other thing they found in urine was metabolites of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. So these are some figures of the metabolites. What that means is they're ingesting, right? Their bodies are metabolizing PAHs. PAHs are found from petroleum products, whether it be the tires themselves or the plastics which are made from petroleum. And so we know that there is a lot of exposure. In particular, the structures that I've provided here from the PBDEs, I can't ever say that, and the PAHs are thought to bioaccumulate, which means that it's stored in the fat of the animals, and as it goes up the food chain, it gets concentrated in the effects. And so this particularly came to mind when you see the animals, like the cows that were roaming the area, and even the milk that would come from cows. And that way, since milk is a lot of fats, would be high in these materials. Also, the structure of these compounds suggests that they could be endocrine system disruptors, which means they mimic hormones to affect bodies that way as well. The one thing that I did not picture here was water. And as we saw in the video, there's water right next to the site. And they even mentioned that the dump was formerly swampland. And I couldn't find hard data from the chemical exposure into the water. But from my experience, I would know that any of these materials that would be water soluble or in sediment that then is traveling in the water could be transported. And to me, that just means that it is a downstream effect. This could exacerbate some of this bioaccumulation, but it expands the area that is impacted by these materials. So clearly there's a human impact, right? But I am not someone who thinks about the human body from a medical perspective. I think about the environment. So I wanted to end with this thinking about the physical environment as well. Most of what I've mentioned here persists, meaning that it doesn't break down quickly or easily. And so there's a permanent mark that's being left on the air, the water, the soil of the region. And there's a lasting impact on the ecosystem, as well as anyone or anything that would be living there. So we all know this quote from Genesis, right? The Lord God then took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. And I thought a citizen from Ghana says it best. Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana says humanity may now have tilled too much and kept too little. He goes on to say our relationship with the Creator, with our neighbor, especially the poor, and with the environment has become unkept.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll come back to those reflections that you made, and thank you for setting up the ground from a scientific point of view. So, Brian?
Sure. Thanks very much. You know, I watched the film a couple of times, and as Jose said, it's difficult to come to terms with. It's a difficult film to watch, I think. So I've written up some thoughts, and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss them. It's difficult to know what to say or where to focus when confronted with a film like Welcome to Sodom. In some ways, I think academic analysis, even ethical analysis, which I think is a lot easier for people to latch onto, can seem a bit disengaged and abstract when it's juxtaposed with the kind of suffering and the harsh reality of the men and women, and for me, especially the children that are living and working in the Agbogloshi scrapyard. So in the time I have, what I want to try and do is restrict my comments, because there's just so much to say about this film and about this situation. But I want to restrict my comments so I can hopefully say something useful. I'm not, as a philosopher and as an ethicist, going to comment on the very specific issue of environmental justice that I think the filmmakers want to foreground, at least in the promotional material for the film, if a bit less in the film itself. I'm not an expert in the economy of the area or in e-waste disposal, and so I can't make any definitive assertion, but having watched the film a couple of times and done a fair bit of sort of preliminary research into it afterwards, it's not completely clear to me that the majority of the scrap in Agbogloshi, or even the majority of the e-waste, comes necessarily from the global north. There's some commentary, including this film, that suggests that much of the e-waste there can be traced to Europe in particular, and North America as well. But a number of other analyses, both from Europe and from Africa, from West Africa itself, suggest that a fair bit of the scrap, because Agbogloshi is not just an e-waste disposal site, it's a much larger scrapyard than that. A fair amount of the scrap and even of the e-waste originates in West Africa itself. But that caveat won't change my thoughts really on what the film provoked me to think. I also want to point out that despite the crude nature of the disassembly of scrap and the retrieval of sellable components that's depicted in Welcome to Sodom, a significant portion of the electronics that make their way through the market system in Accra are in fact refurbished and sold as working electronics. We see in the film a couple of times people checking to see if monitors work before they disassemble them, because obviously you can get more money for a working monitor. But I don't want to ignore this sort of ingenuity of the people making the best possible go of it they can in these incredibly unjust and harsh circumstances. So a lot of things are actually refurbished and used again in other markets. Not everything that passes through Agbogloshi is bashed to smithereens for parts or melted for raw materials in the way that we rightly focus on when we see that film. So I'm going to look at Agbogloshi, both as depicted in the film and as I've read about it in other sources, more as an example of broader trends that have to do with consumption, waste, and environmental justice. And I'm going to bracket for a moment the specific question of the origin and the end fate of the scrap that flows through Agbogloshi. So here are some things that I think are not in dispute at all. First, American consumption is completely out of control and unsustainable. Some estimates suggest that something like 99% of the material throughput of our economy is no longer in use within 6 months. That's not 99% of the things we buy, but 99% of the material throughput to get our way of life is no longer in use within 6 months. American families today are about half the size they were in 1950, but our houses are twice as big. And many people also rent off-site storage units to store even more stuff that they don't use, right? We've accumulated this junk. How did we end up with all of it? I think a lot of us, here in the 21st century, we talk about planned obsolescence, the fact that companies actually plan to make older items obsolete, so you have to purchase more. Every time you buy a new phone, you also need to buy a new adapter and a new headset. But there's another aspect of obsolescence in the supply side that's much more personal in an ethical sense. And it ties into the difficulty of maintaining and repairing goods. Many of you watching this have probably had the experience of taking an item to get repaired, only to be told that the repair is going to cost more than the price of the new item, right? That economic topsy-turviness is a problem. With those kinds of incentives, it's no wonder that many potentially usable items find their way to places like Agbobloshi. And of course, that kind of disdain for refurbishing is a distinctly American trait. Around the world, I've traveled around the world, as many of my co-panelists I'm sure have, you see booming systems and economies focused on repairing goods that Americans regularly toss out without a second thought. Some years ago, before cameras were very common in our cell phones, I had a standard issue digital camera that broke. And I took it to a camera shop here in Los Angeles and was told that a repair would be prohibitively expensive, just buy a new camera. Fortunately for me, at the time this happened, my father-in-law was visiting from Iran. And he insisted that things like this were commonly repaired in Tehran. No problem, just give me the camera. So I gave it to him, and it was promptly shipped back to me a week or 10 days after he had returned to Tehran. Perfect working order. I used it again for another 5 years, no problem. And I don't know what the repair cost him, but it was probably an order of just, tens of dollars. But this kind of obsolescence is not only a supply side. It's not only a thing foisted on us by manufacturers and economies. We've got a role to play in this as well, because there's also a problem of perceived obsolescence, by which I mean our tendency to think that we need a new jacket, a new phone, a new laptop, a new car, when in fact the existing one is perfectly serviceable. The fact is that few Americans even today bother with repairs. That example I had at the beginning of people trying to repair something and finding it economically unfeasible often doesn't happen because people don't bother with trying to repair something. They get a rip in their jeans and they throw them out. The camera stops working and they throw it out. As Henry David Thoreau quipped in Walden, "No man ever stood the lower, in my estimation, for having a patch on his clothes. Yet I am sure that there is a greater anxiety, commonly, to have fashionable, or at least clean and unpatched clothes, than to have a sound conscience." Why fix a seam or mend a run when fast fashion allows you to purchase clothing at prices that literally make disposal a realistic option? But every time we give in to perceived obsolescence, we push something through a series of hand-me-downs and trades into a waste sink like Agbobloshi. So second point, a significant amount of the environmental burden associated with consumption in wealthy countries in the global north is externalized to poorer countries in the global south. Whatever's going on at Agbobloshi, the larger point that the global north externalizes environmental cost onto the global south is undebatable. In an ideal world, ethically, the people that benefit from goods and services would also bear the burden of producing, maintaining, and disposing of those goods and services, right? We would think it would be a very strange world and an unjust world if you did the work, that is, you bore the burden, but I got paid. I enjoyed the benefit. Or if I took a vacation and then the bills arrived at your house. But that's basically what happens with environmental burdens and benefits. Much of the benefit accrues to wealthy nations and wealthy individuals because they consume the end products. But much of the burden smothers poor nations and poor individuals because they're often dealing with the waste. This is true of material production. How many landfills do you see in Malibu? And it's also true of climate change, where the global south has made almost no contribution to the excess greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but is suffering the effects of climate change first and hardest. My third and last point is that a substantial amount of what we think of as recycling is a sham, right? And not just in Agbobloshi. Many products that are labeled as recyclable are not easily recyclable. Others can theoretically be recycled, but need special treatment that's not available in many communities. And still others can be recycled, but it's too expensive. And so that even if you drop it into the blue bin, it's sorted out at a recycling center and sent to a landfill so that the recycling people can recycle the more easily recyclable plastics. It's actually only at a place at the very end of the supply and disposal chain, like agbobloshi, where people are clever enough to milk every last cent of value that they can get out of this stuff. Compostable plastic, styrofoam, even aluminum is mostly, in terms of recycling, a feel-good marketing ploy to allow rampant consumption to proceed guilt-free. It's not that recycling is a bad idea, or even that it's always bad in practice when it's done well. It's rather that recycling is a last resort. The childhood reminder that we had to reduce, reuse, recycle is expressed in order of priority, right? The best thing you can do for the environment and for waste is never to consume in the first place. Don't consume if it's not necessary. If you do decide to make a purchase, buy quality things that will last, even if you have to pay more money for it. Buy used gear before buying new gear, because that carbon footprint has already been made. You're buying it used, refurbished. Repair things religiously and use them up entirely, right? Old climbing partners of mine in New England would say, use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. Just wring every last bit of value you can get out of goods. And finally, if you have worn something down to the point of genuine unusability, then recycling it. Recycling is not a free pass to consume as much as you want, anytime you want. It's a last option to make that consumption not quite as problematic as it otherwise would be. So a place like Agbobloshi, we see the effects of the modern global economy, which is focused on consumption without thinking about material throughput from extraction to production to consumption to disposal and then to waste. And our economy is based and obsessed with on the store window or the Amazon shopping cart while being ignorant of the end point, the landfill, the Agbobloshi, the Giyu, which is a similar e-waste site in China, and other sites in India, Nigeria, and the Philippines. Finally, I don't want to minimize what the people of Agbobloshi have organized to do in incredibly difficult circumstances, right? I don't want to romanticize any of it, that these people are making a living. The point is, as Professor Bouvier-Brown pointed out, they're being poisoned. They're dying young. They're living in horrific circumstances. I'm not romanticizing any of that. But it's also true that a remarkable and ingenious system has sprung up to fill the economic niche and to extract the most value possible out of materials that our economy has trashed as worthless. It's all being done in an unsafe way, and people are injured. There are massive environmental impacts for the people who live and work there and for the environment around the scrapyard. And of course, in an unregulated site like that, I'm sure there are all kinds of other abuses going around. One of the side stories here is a girl who's got to trying to live out an identity as a boy, partly to protect herself and partly to be able to work in the site. Nevertheless, even in those desperate circumstances, we find people carving out a way to get by. And I read a number of stories, not the movie and other sites, about young children putting themselves through school, which costs money in Ghana, so that they are then able to go into military or government service and get out of the slum into which that they've found themselves. But in the end, the very existence of a place like Agbobloshi is a sharp indictment of the economy, the system, and ultimately the civilization that produces it, by which I don't mean Ghana. I don't mean to point the finger at the economy, system, or civilization of Ghana. I mean the entire modern paradigm of global capitalism. If it's set up, if globalized capitalism is set up to create places like Agbobloshi and Giyu and other places, we should all be ashamed of that aspect of it, whatever other goods it brings us. So thanks very much for your time. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for your deep reflection. And we should come back to the perceived obsolescence of a disposable society, and probably also talk about if there are any options to the plastic industry, or if that train has already left the station. So thank you again. Charles, please.
Yes. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the filmmaking process that went into this film, but also a little bit about some of the ethics that I feel personally connected to in the movie. First, let me get down to what I do. I'm a cinematographer. Our job is to lift the film above the visual aspirations of the director. This film is very highly placed in what the director has given the DP to accomplish. The style, the kind of lingering eye of the camera, the observant eye of the camera is one of the I would say successes of this film. We open up with this very almost biblical, mythical tale about the chameleon. And we see the chameleon's skin. And it's serpentine, underlit, and very, I would say, drab and almost dead, almost zombie-like. But as the chameleon's eyes dart around and the light is allowed to shimmer on the skin, we start to see some of that potential beauty of the chameleon. Now, I'm not clear as of yet whether or not this was a subtextual, a foreshadowing of the tale that they were going to let unfold in this film, kind of symbolizing the chameleon and its ability to adapt, to change its own visual essence, and that of the people there, taking what's given this drab, this waste, and turning it into something worthwhile, useful for not only themselves but a greater world. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch, but as a visualist, as a cinematographer, I felt that this film accomplished its goal. Cinematography, I mean, as a visual aesthetic, I feel it accomplished its goal. The cinematographer, the compositions, the framings, the use of the body. The body is used in this work continually to juxtapose against this wide swath of dirge, of waste, of detritus, and it's in one of the opening shots, the slow, almost 360-degree pan around, where there's some bits of comical visuals that you experience, but for the majority, your breath is taken away. Your breath is you're shuddered into the reality of, for as far as the eye can see around you, is Agbogloshi, and if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. This wasteland, this contemporary wasteland. It was difficult for me to watch, I'll say. It's not an easy film to watch, and as a cinematographer, I even say I don't know if I would have allowed my camera to capture some of the intimacy that that the cinematographer and the director went after. And I'm not talking that when I'm talking about the intimacy, I'm talking about the lives of these individuals, following them so closely. Now that's a part of what their job is going to be in telling this story of this environment. But I also felt that at times I felt, I don't know if Charles Swanson could accomplish that. I feel that taking a much more personal beat, maybe I would be a little bit too struck and too emotionally connected to it to be able to sit there and photograph many of the images that I saw. As a one-time director myself and working with many directors, I'll talk a little bit about what I saw in terms of the composition of the piece as a whole. We have this observational documentary that also has this kind of biblical underscore to it. The preacher comes in early on, giving us the grounding although the preacher himself, you could tell, is what we used to call himself kind of a self-taught jackleg preacher. He gives this core, this grounding to the belief of Sodom, right? And he gives us a little bit of background on Sodom and why Sodom existed. And later on in the film, halfway through, I want to say around, I think it was hour and 5 minutes, he gets down to the point of linking Sodom's global perspective to our life. He says it doesn't matter if it's Allah, I think he said Isaiah, he said he talked about the Jewish God. He links us all in this world, connected to what is happening in Sodom, and he doesn't really let us get off with that and saying that what the people are facing in Sodom is a result of our own rampant desire for immediate gratification, this consumerism, this obsolescence, this redundancy. We want it now. And whereas the preacher said that I will begin to start to criticize a little bit of what I feel is present in the ethical portrayal of this film. Without going too critical, I would say that I feel like it's a northern gaze. Some people have used the phrase white gaze. There's a beautification of the misery there that I'm a little bit rather considerably turned off by. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that this subject needs to be made any more grotesque, or there's not a possibility of finding beauty in those moments. But it is as if we're not linking it to the greater visuals of those who are helping to cause this existence. I'm not asking for a direct trail back to Europe, parts of Africa, the Americas, to trace it, because they go a little bit into this juxtaposition of, well, look at these pictures of these lives of these individuals, and it's almost like they're television, almost like us peering in on their lives. They're peering back at these photographs, and they're taking a moment to say, oh, and it's fascinating to them. Well, because the lives that they must imagine these people live, this leisure to be able to go to these beaches and have this life, right? And even the young lady kind of, the one who's dreaming about going up into space. How many of us know and can compare the amount of money we spend on space exploration, right? Compared to the amount of money we spend trying to make sure there's not another Admiral Belushi, make sure that people are taken care of or cared for. I mean, her one aspiration was to go out and above and to know all, so that she could avoid danger, right? The fear. That's real to all of us. And that desire to expand, to go out into outer space, to explore. She knows that she knows that there's something out there that maybe will allow her to live a better life. Now, that's one of the points I felt like the director is accomplishing what they set out. That connected to me. But I dare say there is, in the portrayal of their lives and this observant kind of objective camera, and I'm not always one that believes that the narrative should be God in the story, but the objective camera leaving us to see this, but taking the time to compose such stunning imagery, and taking the time to, in ways I knew from having experience of walking out, you're not simply putting a camera down. There were compositions there that were designed totally to massage, to add a relaxed, almost excuse me, sensuality to the imagery. The the deconstructed bus with the laundry hanging off of it, center framed and so balanced, right? The shot of the gentleman washing himself behind this quote, this small escarpment. All of that's composed, because if you're going to set a camera up, it'll be a little messy. These are very well thought out images, and I feel that I would want to champion, if I'm teaching my students, I would want to champion them to consider the eye that must take into consideration what is causing this, what is part of the background for this existence, and one can't escape, of course, the remnants of a colonial existence. But do I need to hit them over the head with this? I don't think so. But a lot of their passions, a lot of their desires revolve around the same things we want: getting above and getting out, and exploration. And I think that's where I'll say, in some ways, I felt the shortcoming for the film. But I don't want to end on that. I'll say that it's a film I would recommend to any of my students to watch. I will definitely be pulling images from it to share with my students who are shooting documentaries, because I believe that you can imbibe beauty into an image, a very stark and very realistic image.
Thank you so much, Charles. And thank you for all your deep reflections. It is amazing. I just want to throw out a couple of ideas into the table, and then let you start the dialogue among you. The first one, because Charles, and it's fresh in my mind, is that Susan Sontag actually made this study about the image of the disaster, the image of the tragedy, the photography of disaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she actually made all these observations on the way that laying out corpses during the Civil War for photographic purposes,
Yeah,
actually was like a common practice in terms of documentation. So it brings me a little bit closer to this idea of finding the beauty in the tragedy,
yes,
and rearranging it for some specific purpose of manipulating the audience, which all filmmaking manipulates an audience.
yes, it does.
And so because you said something very interesting in terms of the northern gaze, right?
Mhm.
And there's a question, is viewing it, the documentary, from the point of view of a northern gaze, as a northern audience, is this a guilt-free ticket ride towards this problematic? And well, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
My first reaction is it guilt-free? No, but much like a friend of mine and I had a conversation recently about BLM, Black Lives Matter, and he quipped. He says, "Well, have we gone to the point where it's just too much for a single person to contemplate that they're going to be able to make change?" So yes, I see this tragic, this difficult life living in Ghana, in this very wasteland in Ghana. But am I honestly going to take a moment to say to myself, "Oh, I can do something about that," right? Now, that's not the same thing as guilt, but I can rationalize very quickly that, no, I can't do anything about it really quickly. So why attempt to? I think that, and I've said this to my students, it is the rare example of a piece of media that will affect you deeply enough to create change. I'm a bit of a visual cynic. I believe that a lot of times we get entertainment from these moments, and we do feel it. But I'm also a person who believes that action is the end of the day. So your feeling it may lead to a result from my interaction with you, and maybe your interaction with someone else may indirectly result in change. But I'm looking for change. I'm looking for a concrete. So is that an escape from guilt? I'd say a little bit. Yeah, I can look at this picture, I can feel sad about it, and I can say I know it, and I can go and talk wistfully about it, but I don't do anything to change it. As Brian said before, am I changing am I holding on to my iPhone another 5 years? Am I purposefully trying to find if there is a manufacturer that has a certain responsibility in how they remanufacture or recycle their gear? Now, we know that doesn't exist in America. I think the best example is what I think there's a German law about if you produce it, you have to find a way to break it apart. And I think that's realistic. But I think to answer your question in a long diatribe, yeah, I don't think so. I think we feel the guilt and we dismiss it.
I would just say very briefly that this is why I think, as much as I admire art and film, it's a huge part of my life and literature. Making us feel something doesn't get us to the action that Charles is talking about. So I really think we need things like Welcome to Sodom to sort of make us feel something. And I'm a little uncertain about where we were going with the conversation on guilt. Maybe it's my, I'm not sure if it's my environmentalism or my Catholicism, but I see something like that. And I definitely feel guilty in all sorts of ways. But I would add, so we're made to feel something, and then we need to be educated, whether it's about the science and what we can do, or the politics or the economics about what we're able to do. Because I can tell you, I've been talking about climate change for 20 years, since I've been an academic giving talks for it. And every single one of my public talks ends with the same question from the audience. Well, what can I do about it? Right? Because it's such a big problem, right? What can I do about climate change as one little person, Brian Treanor here in Los Angeles? What can I do about what I characterized as a fundamentally unjust economic system that results in things like agbogbloshi as a single person? And so we do need to, in addition to making people feel the need to act, we need to give them the information so that they can then act. Otherwise, I think that their feelings of impotence are entirely understandable. I mean, it's an overwhelming world, even for folks like us. I'm middle-aged and reasonably educated, and I don't know what to do about a lot of this stuff. I need other folks to help me figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question, Nicole, do you want to address this part in terms of
I think they responded to what I was feeling as well, which is, yes, you feel something, yes, you want to do something. Like we were talking in the pregame, I had more questions perhaps at the end of this than I had answers, which is okay. That is part of what art is supposed to do. But it would have been nice to have a little bit more concrete, why and where and what do I do as a person watching it.
like a call of action in terms of the film is missing? Would you say that? I wanted to ask you something in terms of, as Brian actually put it, in terms of our global capitalistic system. As you might recall, a couple of months ago, the price of oil actually went underneath zero, went into negative values. So eventually, and because we are developing all these alternative sources of energy, that that oil still needs to find the way out as a source of revenue for all these companies that are holding all this oil. And I read that one of the ways in the future in which cheap oil will actually move towards is the plastic industry. So we're gonna get not less plastic, but more plastic in the future, and the capitalistic system will try to find ways to transform oil into plastic. So I said it briefly before. Do you think that because plastic is a major issue in terms of pollution, right? And if there's like actually a way, is there an option to plastic?
That's a tough one. There are ways, but I think like Brian was talking about earlier, it's all about our decisions about what you choose to buy and the cost of those materials. And so, you know, on a personal level, I can use all the glass materials instead of the plastic counterparts, you know, for storing the food in the fridge or those sort of things. But, you know, just me by myself, again, that's okay, that's great, but you know, there's so much plastic in everything. I also get the sense, right, that plastic is everywhere. We don't even know all the places it is. It's amazing. It's in clothing, it's in fabrics, so I don't see it going anywhere, unfortunately. I do think that there's been a push a little bit more for you know, the easier solutions. I know our students are really big on like water bottles and that kind of stuff, which is great. You know, the straw bans and all those sort of things. It's at least a step in the right direction because they're easy. It's the low hanging fruit. The other stuff I don't think we're ever going to get out of the fact that, you know, even the shell of the computer is plastic. And you know, because it's such an amazing material, to be perfectly honest. I mean, that's like, you can't replicate the flexibility and the durability and things like that. But I do think there are ways to really push for things that are easy to replace, right? Or, you know, maybe get water bottle companies not to just make the water bottle thinner, but to actually, like, that was actually a move, in my opinion, in the wrong direction, because then you can't reuse that material and you know, you can only use it once and then gets a hole in it. But I think there is an undercurrent of things that we can do. I don't see plastic, you know, as a general thing ever really going away. Now, is the extra oil gonna, you know, is it gonna just make more of those things, or are they gonna come up with new things to make? You know, I have no idea. I mean, even during quarantine, we started coming up with all sorts of new things to play with the children, and I had never played with this kinetic sand business that apparently is really big with toddlers and stuff, because it's all very tactile. And and I'm like, why, you know, this feels weird, and what is it? And I'm looking it up online. Well, there's plastic in it, you know. It's what makes it feel so unique. And so there are new ways of seeing plastic in our lives, unfortunately, as well, that we're not even aware of.
No, may I ask, Nicole? I'm sorry, Pepe. Can I ask?
Yeah, no, please.
Nicole, it's Brian, maybe you know. I mean, it's a fantasy. It's my fantasy, right? Is there a much more safe, biodegradable plastic that, you know, that has a shorter, you know, a breakdown life of something that can, you know, turn into biomass quicker? Or is that a fantasy? I mean, Brian, you even said it. It's just like the fantasy of this biodegradable plastics. I mean, I think for the layman, I will walk out of here and scream to all my friends, and no such thing. Stop asking for it, right?
Right.
Because I think that most of us want it.
I have a thought there, but Nicole, you're probably the expert here.
I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think it would then be plastic. I think it's our terminology of the material. So, you know, there's all this kind of corn-based
Oh, right,
um,
yes.
you know,
Polymers
utensils and those sort of things. You know, the dining halls are big on that kind of
Right.
thing. I think it's all about our terminology of what we've considered plastics. In the scientific realm, it's about being a polymer, and it's about having certain functionalities of it. And for in that case, it, you know, no, unless you can train some microbes. I mean, our only saving grace here is finding the genetics of the right critter, which is going to be a microorganism to break things down.
Oh, wow.
Which, this is where I'll jump in, and I don't want to say this with too much authority, because my level of understanding of this is sort of reading the Atlantic or the BBC or the Guardian or something like that. But there are microorganisms that will consume oil, for example, and that people have looked into enhancing and genetically modifying and sort of breeding to make them even more efficient, so you could dump them on oil spills in the ocean and get them to consume it. And I think I've read, certainly within lockdown, but probably within the last 2 months, about a team, I think at Cambridge, that did indeed find a microorganism that had already evolved to be able to break down plastics. Whether it's the specific kind of polymers Nicole is talking about or not, I don't know. And they had already pushed it through several generations and made it either 40 or 60% more efficient than they had found it in nature. So I think there are possibilities of pushing in the direction to make plastic a little more biodegradable, and maybe we can make recycling more efficient so that we can reuse it in certain ways. But I do think it's just a general human fantasy that we can, you know, have our cake and eat it too, that we can sort of live lifestyles with American consumption, which is unprecedented, as we all know, in the history of the world. I live with luxuries. We are right now Zooming on a luxury that Louis XIV could have never imagined in his most wild dreams of heaven. We want to have that style of life, but still have the impact of a hunter-gatherer, and it's just not possible. But maybe it's just my skepticism coming in on this point.
And I think I share that same.
I want to bring forward the little bit the idea of the characters in the film and the intentionality of relations. And I think that Brian actually mentioned, you know, without the purpose of romanticizing how efficient they have become surviving in this extreme circumstance, which actually reminds me of how they call water. They call it pure water.
Right.
They sell it as pure water, and it reminds me a little bit of Dune, you know, not David Lynch's movie, but you know, the novel. And there's like this sensation of living in limbo, and I think that has to deal with a conscious decision by the filmmaker in which the background is always in gray, right? Absorbed by the pollution that is surrounding them. So it feels like they are in a different planet. And there's like this constant aspiration, but also this constant duality, right? There's like the girl that it's a boy, and then the man that wants to be an entrepreneur, and the doctor that is in fact gay, but also comes from another religion. So there's like this inner contradictions in all of these characters. And I just want to bring this idea of the chameleon up, obviously, which is like addresses this duality of this constant reference of the characters of being conscious where they are, and this almost like impossible dream of getting out of this situation, of the purgatory, if you wish.
All except for the Jewish gay gentleman. He
Right.
knows. He said he will probably die there.
Either.
Yeah, it's.
So Yeah, Brian, you were going to say.
Well, I was going to make the same point as Charles, that what was interesting to me about the characterizations, insofar as we did get characterizations. So, I went back and watched it the second time, hoping to get names, and maybe I missed it twice in a row, but I don't think we ever got the name of the young girl who's living as a boy, any of those sorts of things. So there's characterization, but it's still impersonal. But it struck me as interesting, just in terms of observation. I don't know what to make of it, but you've got one group of people who are in the scrapyard dreaming about getting out. There's the one guy who keeps talking about getting to Europe. He's getting his passport together and his papers together. A number of the kids, I don't know this from the movie, but from other reading I've done, there are kids who go in there to work after school to try and get extra money for their families or for their own schooling so that they can try and finish school, right? So they might even have a school set of clothes that they wear. They run home, change into other clothes, and go into the scrapyard, which still makes it horrible because bunches of them get injured there and everything else. But then I too, just as you were asking the question, Jose, was just so struck by the former doctor. And I felt like what he represented was like, this is where you end up when you're at the very, very end of your line, when there's nowhere else for you to go, no other community that will shelter you, no other people that will care for you. He ends up there. And I think Charles is right that he's the one person who says, I'm going to die here. And I just, that was one of many heartbreaking moments in the film, but that little window was just awful to see, I thought.
Yes.
I felt that, Jose, when you were talking about it, it always strikes me that we elevate ourselves as human beings. And Pepe, you and I have had this conversation about this Homo sapien need to elevate ourselves above the rest of nature, rest of the world. Because if you're looking at it and you're seeing these individuals as organisms, every person there knows life is precious. I mean, that's not taken for granted. I mean, they know there's a direct correlation to, do I get enough of whatever this commodity is, and to make it through the day. Like the hard brassed negotiating of that young man at the beginning, where he's like, no. He knew exactly the game. He's back. You don't see that in someone my age, right? I mean, I'm, and each one of them knew, and they even went down and they showed, and I have to give the directors credit, that once the big pile of material is loaded onto the truck to be taken out, there are still individuals knowing that there's scraps there to be had to then be processed, right?
Yes.
But then that gets to me that is how bad it is. That's how harsh it is, a harsh reality it is. And as you said, all of them, all the majority of the ones doing that are the very young, the most vulnerable, right? And that's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking.
What do either of you make as cinematographers, or for Nicole and myself, just as non-cinematographer viewers? I was kind of surprised that they didn't show any injuries. I have to imagine people are injured in a scrapyard like that every day.
Yes.
I mean,
I just say this the same. That's what I'm saying. I feel like that's some of the ethical issues I have with it, right? Because it's all progressing in this almost operatic way. It's painful, but it's beautiful, and there's no break in that. There's no moment of the jeopardy that this child. I mean, we can feel it. We can feel it every second, but there is no reality of the jeopardy that those children are living in every day. And like you said, if you're there for, I could imagine they must have been there at bare minimum 3 months to shoot all that. Minimal. They may have been in residence 6 months, close to a year. Documentaries, you shoot a great deal. You had to see something. No flip-flops on feet.
I know.
I mean, the ingenuity of it all. But when they stripped that bus and there were no gloves,
Right.
no boots, a couple of boots, but just the sheer, you're like, who's getting hurt here? Who's,
Yeah.
you know, who's, and to not show that, that is a decision, right?
Yeah.
That's got to be a decision.
One of my first notes was exactly that, Brian, the cleanliness of the piece. And there's like this search of the poetry of the wasteland. And what Charles said about the biblical sensation of things with, you know, the obvious reference to the preacher and, you know, some quotes from the Lion Man, as he calls himself, that he needs to be a lion. There is like this, the way that I see it is that there's like this epic component in terms of its narrative, which actually is, if you actually go and see it and watch it again, you will see that all the burning, it turns into this almost mythological cinematic episodes that are reinforced through sound. So it's like the reverb of the sound as they are burning the plastic and trying to find this, like the metal again is like mining into this. It's like Africa again mining for gold, right? There's like, it's enhanced through sound design. So it's sound design is extremely important in this film. Yes, Charles.
Yeah, but you're also using a visual effect, right? Slow motion. There are times when they crank from regular speed, which is very, very objective. It's just to this almost diegetic, subjective slowing of motion. It's the sensualizing of that flame and getting it closer to its biblical mythos, right? And I'm looking at them at the same time. I'm going, well, I know you've got to switch several buttons on that. You've got to know you're going to do this. It's not something that the camera falls into itself. That is a plan that is proposed by either the director or the cinematographer. And does it help to elevate the lives of these individuals, the story that the lives you're telling, or the beautification of this tragedy, right?
Right. And there's like this portrayal, and I'll let you please, I'll make this, and please make your observations. Two things, that is like there's like no organic matter decomposing because it's not that time of dumpster. So there's like this added visual framing in which there's like this sort of yes, there is dust, but they're not gonna die of malaria. They're gonna die from ingesting all this smoke, which Nicole just mentioned. So there's like this kind of its own kind of hell, right? It's another kind of hell and another kind of visually speaking of poverty.
Yeah, I mean, this is not exactly following your thought there, Jose, but bringing it back to some of the things Nicole told us about the chemicals and their effects on human health and things like that. And the two things I was sort of expecting on my first viewing of this that I would eventually be confronted with were an injury in the scrapyard when someone gets his arm cut off or something like that. And at some point I expected to see someone dying of cancer or some other horrific, other biological result of living, because it's not just the people working in the scrapyard. The scrapyard is on the edge of a larger slum, a poor part of Accra where a lot of people live. And it's not like the smoke stays in the scrapyard. It, as Nicole said, it drifts over the vegetables in the market and other things like that. Just given the things the filmmakers told us in the movie, certainly there are other, anyway, I was just kind of surprised that we didn't see that at some point.
Or you didn't see anyone that had the effects of it later, like being maimed or something, you know, like you not necessarily seeing them get hurt in real time, but have gotten hurt. Like everyone seemed to be all put together in that way.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, I guess, also another question for Nicole will be, in terms of air pollution and at that like level, at that extreme level, which is happening in that site, what will be the expectancy of life? Do you have any in terms of yeah?
It's too hard to ever tell these sort of correlations because it's so dependent on also the people that live there and their livelihoods and their medical attention, and you know it's finding causality in any environmental pollution issue is so difficult. But yeah, I mean, they're breathing in this stuff, so you could imagine I was reading from the articles that I was finding was sort of the mid 20s and 30s and things that people were dying at that age, but they didn't really when they did sort of when they took the samples to, the blood samples and all that stuff, they would get all the demographics. Are you a worker? Are you in the town? Do you eat from this market? As much as they could, and they couldn't find any correlations in those sort of things because it seemed like even the surrounding areas, people had so much of this material in their bodily fluids and, in their cells that it was even hard to differentiate between people that worked with it and lived nearby. And so that's the impact of all of this stuff going downwind and then downstream as well, I'm sure.
Right.
So yeah, so in terms of life expectancy, I have no idea really, but it would not be good. I mean, just living in LA in the past few months, just the feel of it, I can't imagine what it must actually feel like to breathe that air, never mind the health effects. But like, there were days even as far away as we were from those fires, because we were never in actual danger of them, unlike these folks who are right next to them. You could just feel it in your body. So I can't imagine.
Yeah.
There is like well, the thing that comes to mind, the image that comes to my mind is primordially young males working in this environment, right? So and a few girls, a few women there. The other image that I cannot take out of my head is they buy water and then cut, and they're using the water not to drink it, but to cool the fire and to, in the process of this biblical, epical, metallurgic, postmodern process, which is just.
Well, I mean, the scale of that, to think about that this pouch of water is, I mean, how much water do I take how much water do I take for granted every day, right? But they know they know how to use the water. It doesn't seem like they're scrimping on the water so much, but it's still in these pouches, and that's their hydration, that's their cooling of the forges or whatever they've the fires that have burned the plastic off. It's a sheer amazement of how they can compartmentalize that in their everyday. Like, okay, water is here, and the girl has to be here, because if the girl's not here, you saw there were like 4 girls waiting on one time when they were burned welding and such and doing such, and I'm like, wow, that's part of the whole process. And the separation, as you mentioned, Jose, of these roles that are they're classic, but yeah, the girl says, I'm doing what boys do. I know I can't be seen as a boy, but all the other girls have their roles, and it's saddening. That was one of the saddest part, and then to also the sadness of realizing the realities of the gentleman who's Jewish and gay, and that just and that's the saddest parts.
And so much of this is because of plastic, and yet the water was contained in plastic.
So plastic,
yeah, so it's like it's a cycle of events that, and of course it is, right? You're not going to bring out a giant glass jug. I mean, it's not, it's realistic, right, to have it in plastic, but it's also part of this whole cycle.
Yes. There's like a couple of quotes. One is burn it to make it fresh copper. And the
Oh,
other
yes.
one is, and the other one is that the two of them are watching TV, which is like an American show. And he says, look, they have house flowers. And the other one says, yes, big flowers. It's just,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
so we have 10 minutes left. Could you please give us like your closure statements, ideas, statements and ideas, or anything that you would like to say?
We go in any particular order? Nicole, do you want to say
Nicole?
anything first since you started, or Charles?
I acquiesce. I'm going to be short. Yeah.
Nicole, please.
I'm not sure if I have any more to add to this conversation. It's been really wonderful. I feel like watching it just from my perspective is such a small part of, you know, the entire picture. So I really am grateful for all of your comments and everything. I think some of it is, you know, I will always sit with these environmental justice issues and just again feel that we need some sort of plan, some sort of action item going forward. But I really do appreciate a film like this to bring about these issues. I remember seeing things like this in high school with, you know, certain brands and slave labor and things like that. And so I think it really is an important kind of film for young people to really realize their impact, because like we all, our professions are about young people and teaching them. And so I think if that message comes across, even if it's not the perfect way of doing it, but I think our job is then to figure out how can we help them with that next step.
Yeah.
Because I've given all those talks that Brian has, and it's always, what do we do and who am I? I am so insignificant in this grand scheme of things. And I think we aren't insignificant. We can each at least do what's right in our existence, in our families, with our kids, or, you know, and spread the message with our students. So I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to whoever decides to click on this link to share these ideas with. And so, yeah, I mean, I think my closing thoughts are where we started, basically.
Brian, you mind if I go?
No, go ahead, Charles.
I would, my closing thoughts would be that I just want to take a moment to say that my first comments were around my desire to have change, and I just want to show my ignorance in the fact that art can often inspire change. And I don't want to stop anyone watching this, or in my students in particular, from feeling that I'm not supportive of that spark inside of you that wants to create something that may create change in another person. You never know. I just never know. But I also challenge you to find ways to bring to link your art to the concrete, a way in which we can bind those two things together, that it's action and art, and so it doesn't, every artistic piece doesn't have to be that way, but if we're out there and we're trying to instill that and you're feeling that, then why not? Let's shoot for it. Let's try to shoot for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got maybe two quick parting thoughts. One thing that was in my little notes I've been jotting that I wanted to come back was to Nicole's last slide. And I think there's ways to think of what I'm about to say in a sort of more explicitly, traditionally spiritual or religious way, but then also in a sort of much more just metaphorical kind of sense. But as I've said before, I think the very existence of a place like Agbobloshi is, in a way, an indictment of us and the civilization that we built. And if I were going to put it in well, okay. My oldest daughter moved out to go to university this fall. My younger daughter's still at home with us, and I try not to drive too much in LA, but when I do drive, I get frustrated with traffic. And my daughters can tell you that I'll often be behind the wheel of traffic, and I'll just be like, God does not want us to live like this. right? Like there's something wrong with organizing our society such that result is the 405 gridlock. And I'd say a similar thing, right? There's this image we're playing with of Sodom and Gomorrah and these cities that have turned their back on God. And Nicole left us with these words, both from the Bible and from Cardinal Turkson, that, you know, we are supposed to be living in the world in such a way that we're using things in it. Certainly, human beings have to consume things to live in the world, just like every other biologically evolved being. But as rational and ethical creatures, we should be caring for it. And I just think the existence of places like Agbogbloshie it just demonstrates a real failure of our civilization. And, you know, as do other things like poverty and poor people without health care and all these other sorts of things. But that's one thing I would want to bring us back to, this idea of, you know, if this is Sodom, it's not because of the people who live there, who really don't have many other choices. They've been trapped there in a way by other circumstances. But it's this kind of like mark or stain on all of us that we participate in a system and an economy that results in things like that. And so the second and last thought I want to give is that back to this point of, you know, what should students do about this? And I would encourage students who are watching this, hopefully some of my students will tune into it because I announced it to them. Two things. First of all, to the extent possible, I would try and, as Professor Bouvier-Brown has pointed out, it's impossible to completely opt out of plastic or to close the loop in a full circle recycling in our lives. We are caught in systems bigger than ourselves. But insofar as we can minimize that, minimize it. Don't buy things just because it's the shiny thing that catches your eye. If you have a functioning jacket, you don't need 3 other jackets in 3 different colors. If you have a functioning laptop or cell phone, I mean, I'm not other people, artists like the two of you and filmmakers, I'm sure you do other things on your laptop, but my laptop is 98% Microsoft Word and email. Right. I'm sure scientists and economists, you guys do other things with your laptops. Maybe you need more, but I could really be writing the papers and the books that I write on like an Apple IIe or a Commodore 64 or something like that. It's like, I mean, I'm old enough, and I know you all are too. I'm old enough. I wrote my university papers on a typewriter.
Yes. Okay. I try to tell my students that. Yes.
So the first thing I tell our students is to try to minimize your own waste output. Just be conscious of it. You don't have to beat yourself up with every time you get groceries from the market and it has some plastic on it. There's some things it's difficult to opt out of, but as Professor Bouvier-Brown pointed out, there's lots of low-hanging fruit. There's lots of things it's easy to sort of avoid once you're conscious of it. And then the second thing, and here I'm with the rest of you, I don't really know where to get started. For folks who are really inspired to act on this, I'm sure there are NGOs and other organizations that are working to reduce e-waste. Henry David Thoreau says, I think perhaps a bit too strongly, that our only moral obligation is not to contribute to evil, right? Like solving the evil of the world is too big an ask for any one of us. You know, the world was messed up when I was born into it, and I'm pretty sure it's still going to be messed up when I die and leave it. So I can't solve all the evil of the world, but I do think I'm morally obligated to try not to contribute to it, and then to do my small part to try and fix some of it, right? And if for any students watching this, you're motivated to think about environmental justice, that's going to be your small part, your corner of the world that you're going to till in the field. That's great. Other people may work on climate change. Other people may work on Black Lives Matter. Other people may work on female genital mutilation. There's all kinds of problems in the world that we need to address. But I'm sure there are organizations out there that work on e-waste recycling and environmental justice that you can dig up.
Well,
So don't lose hope.
Yes.
Thank you so much, the 3 of you. This has been invigorating and revealing in so many ways, and getting all this like different angles of the same problem is what makes it like really interesting and exciting. So Acti, thanks you. And I think that I've heard it loud and clear that this website, the website of this page, should also include some ways to people inform some actions through external links. So I'll be searching for that and asking Nicole and Charles and Brian about links and
Sounds
more
good.
information that will create a complete view of the problematic that we talked about today. Thank you again. I wish you the best of luck and see you soon.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much
Thank
for
you.
hosting this.
Nice to see you guys.
Stay safe and healthy, everybody.
Please.
Bye.
Bye-bye.